but I think, and I agree with the opponent and the reviewer market both, that the analysis of dissipative force was completely missed. Because in my point of view, if you have steady state, and of course the most interesting part is the transition process, and of course it gives you the information about the dissipative, this dynamic, the transition process. So I think that somehow the friction coefficient between these sticks, which governs the process of dislodging, clearly governs this transition time reaching this state. So it's interesting for me using with all these cameras and so on, which we didn't have in my time when I was a team leader. Now it's interesting to measure the dependencies of this transition time. I suppose it's according to some exponential, depending on the characteristic of this dissipative force. So I agree that it's not enough for the theory, which is known from many papers, which uses just the simplest, in this case, the steady state. And of course, I would prefer more detailed this transition process. So that's, in my point of view, this qualitatively simple mechanistical problem was not done in full as it should be for this case. And that's why I grade this as 5, so I put 1. By default, 3. I put for the good, theoretical part, it's known, and for the quite good comparison of the theory with the experiment, which is, in my point of view, also was done correctly. And as to the discussion, I put 1. So 1, 3, 1, and nothing I downgrade from the answer. So I ended with 5.
Thank you. Short comment on the high 7 by Dogma.
Yes, I give you 4 for the report. I like your video, it's clear, and I like the comparison between experiment and theoretical model. I give you 1.6 for the discussion. It was good. You supported your data and theory graphs, and I rounded up.
Okay, thank you. 1.5 for 6s for the opposition, so quite uniform. Short comment on the opposition. Let's see which are the correct. It's yeah. So I believe that the opposition was okay. So you found some of the weak parts. You didn't clarify some other parts that were actually more related to the presentation. So I haven't seen a clear discussion that was actually claiming some concrete or some discrete slides on addressing some discrete slides inside the presentation, and like claiming the experimental method, for example, as the reviewing team pointed out. And it was more a discussion of you following your own idea. It was somehow related to the overall phenomenon, but not very closely related to the report that was actually being presented. And also in the discussion, I felt like you spent too much time actually discussing the influence of the ground, rather than moving along, because you've made your point like within 1 minute, stating that the ground would clearly have an influence, as the reviewing team sufficiently pointed out. But you kept on discussing that for several minutes, so I would have rather liked to see a discussion on some more aspects of the phenomenon itself than actually sticking to the influence of the ground. So for the opponent, I added 0.75 for the questions asked. I added 1.5 for the opposition speech. I added 1.5 for the discussion. I didn't subtract anything for jury questions, and this is how I end up with 5. I guess there's no more comment needed on the opponent, as we've been quite uniform. 2 high 8s on the review, 1 low 6 on the review by Victor.
Yes, I distributed to the marks totally 6, like this. Review of report, I put 1.5. Review of position was 1.5. Also 1.4 questions. Total is 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay, Evan, highlight.
So I thought it was very good review. I gave you 1.5 points for the question asked. So I thought you had some very relevant questions that were not considered by either the reporter or opponent. So that was a good point for me. I gave you 2 points for both the review of report and opposition. It was pretty consistent, clearly presented, weak points pointed out, but also some positive remarks for what was definitely a very decent report in opposition. And what I like most was the discussion analysis, because you always had a very precise opinion and opinions that was clearly. So, very good.
Yeah, I fully agree. Best review I've seen so far in the tournament, and I think you did a very good job on actually stating your own opinion. And I felt like you were following a clear strategy. Like the questions you asked were directly linked to the things you brought up on your slides, and you also made your point. I really like you actually clarifying your point on the influence of the surface within like 2 sentences, and it was all clear. So I really like your clear opinion on each of the points. You could have addressed some more missed points. I mean, this is always complicated, also due to time constraints. I mean, obviously, the review was packed with reasonable arguments, and you spent, to my personal opinion, if you spend some more time actually discussing the missed points, I would have maybe given you even a higher mark. This was rather short, so I didn't add anything for the missed points addressed. And so I end up with 8, with adding 1.5 for the questions, 2.5 for the review of the report, 1.5 for the opposition, and 1.5 for discussion analysis. Is any more justification wanted by any of the teams? Okay, if not, we'll proceed to break and meet again in 5 minutes. Thank you.